All right, Bang Bang. Today is Tuesday. It's October 5th. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. Here with Chief. Chief, how are we today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Got a great gift today to us. Perfect timing.
I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll hold it up right now.
The Colossal guys over there, Ben Lamb, who we had on last week, and
Dr. George Church.
Dr. Church. Yeah, they gave us a woolly mammoth tooth.
I mean,
fucking thing.
It's a fossilized woolly mammoth tooth. I was reading an article just today that says that there's like a crazy market for woolly mammoth tusks. So like, as that we talked about this in the last show, like the permafrost in Russia and Siberia is like melting a little bit, so it makes it easier to get at and find some of these tusks. And then people find them in Russia, and then they end up on like the black market, and people are paying like millions of dollars for tusks.
I would love to find out the people who like start trends, and I understand that because it's an extinct animal.
Yeah.
But just, I mean, we've talked about art before, and just knowing how that works and how shit just takes over and the fads happen. That's how you got to get. That's how it has to happen.
I went to Music Box Theater like a month ago and watched a documentary called The Lost Leonardo about art. And it was basically we should do a free swim on it at some point because it is fucking crazy. These guys found a painting and they bought it for like $2,000 at some like random place down in New Orleans, and then like 6 years later it was sold to like the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia for like $500 million.
Oh wow!
It went through like the restoration process, and like people appraising it and be like, yeah, it's a Da Vinci. Other people being like, no, it's not. And they show all these like different things, but basically they just wanted to. People just were self-interested, so they're like, yes, Da Vinci, yes, Da Vinci, yes, Da Vinci, and the price just goes up and up and up. And then they're supposed to put it on display, and the Crown Prince is like, nah.
Wow.
So now it's just like in some vault somewhere.
Wow.
Valued at $500 million ish.
Just a nice chunk of change sitting around. You know what's not a fad? You know it will be around forever?
What's that?
That's drinking Miller Lite.
Been around since the 70s.
Yep.
My favorite. I had a couple this weekend.
1975. You had a couple this weekend?
Yeah.
College football,
and even like going back last Thursday, I met somebody out for beers, and they ordered some like fancy like foo thing, and it's like, where's the bartender? He's like out like pouring it, getting the header. I'm like, give me a Miller Lite. And you know what? Mine was better than his.
There you go.
So it is the best beer going.
Have you had your annual pumpkin patch trip yet?
Not yet. I'm looking forward to it though. I might even carve a few this year.
There you go.
Yeah.
Enjoy Miller Lite while doing that. Fall activities in Miller Lite.
Maybe we should do a pumpkin carving competition in the office.
Oh God.
What's wrong with that? I think it'd be funny.
Yeah, it wouldn't be pretty, but it'd be funny.
It would be funny. I think we should do it.
Yeah, sure. I'll enjoy a Miller Lite, and I'll carve a pumpkin. Why not?
There you go.
I've never done that, though. Isn't that kind of gross when you're getting in the guts like that?
You've never carved a pumpkin before?
I mean, I've never, like, as a kid, I've never
What
been
the fuck?
I've never been the one to gut it. Like, you know, to put it that way. I've carved a pumpkin, but I've never been the one to do the dirty work. As an
Who's
adult,
doing that? Your mom?
Yeah, I was a kid. I don't do that.
You know what? Get in there. Get dirty. Get a little gross. Get some dirt underneath your fingernails.
I mean, I'm not opposed to that. I'm just saying, when it comes to carving a pumpkin.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was for the adults at that time.
Okay. Well, my
mom
mom always
carve a pumpkin with, every October.
I don't carve one. I haven't done one in years, but I do remember scooping the guts out. And if you've ever had like any, you ever had spaghetti squash? Ever made that?
I don't think so.
It's so good.
Yeah.
So, but that is the same thing. Like you split it open, and then you carve it out, and you gut it, and put it in the oven, and roast it, and you got a nice, delicious, healthy meal.
There you go.
Yeah.
Miller Lite, great taste, 96 calories. Go to MillerLite.com/redline to find the delivery options near you, or you can pick up Miller Lite pretty much anywhere that they sell beer. It's Miller time. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 96 calories and 3.2 carbs per 12 ounces. All right, Chief, what are we getting into today?
We're talking about the Federal Reserve, and it's in the news, but not as much as it should be lately because I feel like it's this mysterious thing that nobody really understands. Everybody knows it exists, but no one really understands it. Like we've talked about it like a little bit on other episodes here and there, but like, what do you know about the Federal Reserve?
They control, obviously, the money situation.
The money situation, like exactly. Like what the fuck does the money situation mean, and where did it come from, and all this and that. And it is like a very complex, convoluted, complicated, whatever you want to call it, process where it's like this wildly important, powerful entity that no one really has any direct control over, but they're basically in charge of like keeping the economy on the up and up, and but they're like a federal agency that's in charge of all of our money, but there's not a ton of oversight from the actual government. So it's like they're in the government, but they're not, and it's like this mysterious thing. It's like, what the fuck is even going on? And then the reason it's in the news now, like you brought up like the debt ceiling before, we were talking about pre-show a little bit of like what's going on where we might run out of money, which is something that like is a real thing. And there's like a lot of like horse trading going on, like between Democratic senators and their own party trying to get things, get budgets approved so we can like continually have a functioning government. We've had this happen in the past where they're like, I bet you would love to go to the national park. I bet you would love to watch a Air Force Army game. Sorry. Like we can't because the government shut down. So like they have like all these when it's all related to the debt ceiling and whether or not we should just raise it continually forever. And that's kind of where the Fed comes in and with like the printing of money. So like all your debt relief things was like, well, that was really just the government was printing more money. It's in charge of inflation. And so we're going to get into all of that. And then the Wall Street Journal has been doing a lot of really interesting reporting on some of the presidents of the Federal Reserve getting in like big trouble for corruption, but no one else is talking about it. So we're going to talk about it.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't realize it was such like a big agency like that.
It's like every dollar that gets printed in America is coming from the Federal Reserve.
I knew that. I knew that they made. I've actually been there.
What?
Yeah.
And where?
It's in DC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
As a
there's
kid.
different. Yeah. There's. Yeah.
I've seen like you know, it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I went in like '99 or something.
Okay.
When you could like
just watch the sheets of money.
Yeah, and you could go to like all those places, like go to the Capitol.
Yep.
I mean, I know they do that again now, but I know after 9/11 they stopped a lot of it.
Right.
Yeah, I went there. It was pretty cool. But
Yeah. What do you know when you're a kid?
Exactly.
Yeah. And they have those mints where they make the money all over the country. Mm-hmm. So it's a very fascinating thing, and it's. I think some people believe that this central banking has just been around for as long as America's been around. It's not true. It's actually something that, and I think we've talked about this before, but have you ever seen the play Hamilton?
You know I have.
Well, I brought it up because you guys would let me draft it as a soundtrack. Yeah, but
very familiar with it though, obviously.
Yeah. So Alexander, this is a battle that goes back to like the founding fathers because they really rebelled against having a central bank, and that was one of their key reasons for fighting the War of Independence. Was because they did not agree with the banking system of England that they were subject to. So we always talk about taxation without representation and like, oh, we can't get in there. But it was really like we didn't want to. The whole thing was fought, according to Ben Franklin, has this great quote. He goes, "The inability of colonists to get power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of King George and international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War." So we talk about, the Battle of Bunker Hill, and we're oppressed, and the tea tax, and this tax, and that, the Stamp Act, all this kind of stuff. And it was, no taxation without representation. Well, that's kind of like a whitewash of the real issues. If you go back and read quotes from Thomas Jefferson and from Ben Franklin, was like, hey, like we just want to be able to print our own money and have our own economy that's not solely tied to the crown and the Central Bank of England, because the Central Bank of England or the British Empire, they got the idea from the Dutch originally, and that like idea of central banking was basically making like the wealthiest people in those countries like wholly powerful. And so the founding fathers wanted to get away from that, like separation of church and state. They want to have a representative democracy. They wanted to have the, kind of a free-flowing economy, and they wanted the power to print dollars and run the country in the hands of like the people, okay, per like Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, people like that. And that is where this quote from Franklin comes in. It's like, wait a second, what? Like I was, that's not what I was taught in elementary school. I was taught that, it was the redcoats and they were oppressing America. We rose up and we defeated them. And it was because we wanted our rights. Really, it was about money. Like, and it seems like the more you learn about every fucking war ever fought,
It's about money.
might not be only about money, but it's a lot about money.
Big contributing factor.
Huge. Maybe, at least 50% of every war seemingly gets tied back to money. So even up until today, like the Iraq War, like you could make a lot of arguments that was all about money.
Yeah.
But so that was like a big, and then, so we break free, we have our independence, and then it's like every state has their own currency, and we're like trying to figure out like who owes what, and are they going to be kind of independent states like that just came together to fight the revolution, or are we going to have a real country? Are the state's going to be more? So this was our founding fathers were really trying to sort out how to shape the country. And what, like, now that we're free, it's like, oh fuck, we actually have to like have a government. So they come together. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that story. And then you had one guy, Alexander Hamilton, who was really in favor of central banks and powerful federal government. And then you had Thomas Jefferson on the other end of the spectrum, who really wanted banking to be separate from the government and wanted to be free of that. And then he had the quote that said, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a moneyed aristocracy that has set the government at defiance. The issuing power of money should be taken away from the banks and restored to the people whom it properly belongs. So that's what he was saying. So it's like the elected government should be in charge of printing and controlling the money supply of its own country. And that kind of goes back to that other episode we talked about before in 1971 when we got away from the gold standard. It was just like, print whatever you want because it's just tied to confidence. But the idea of the central bank, really, you can it had been like kind of continually throughout the early parts of a country, the first 100 years of the country have been like, okay, let's have a central bank. And then it gets up there and the people and Congress would be like, no. And it gets defeated. So it's something that the bankers continually wanted to do. But it kept, once it was written into law or, proposed as a law, it would get shot down. So it never really happened. And then you fast forward to 1906. In 1906, there was a giant earthquake in San Francisco. Giant. Destroyed 80% of the city. So they were trying to rebuild San Francisco, and they had all this kind of capital infusion into the city to rebuild things. And then people are like, wait a second. Like, how is there all this money? And there ended up being like a run on the bank. So have you seen It's a Wonderful Life?
Yes.
Okay. So like that was like the central theme of like, we got to save his bank and save, what was the main character's name again? I'm blank. George.
George. Rico talks about him all the fucking time.
It's my mom's favorite movie.
I know. Damn it. Rico talks about him all the time.
I know.
I've seen it recently.
George. You're looking it up?
George Bailey.
George Bailey.
Yeah.
God damn. I can't believe I didn't remember that. So so basically, this created like a ripple effect that there was a run on the banks out there, and it kind of spread throughout the country. And then by 1907, there was like a massive, massive financial crisis where there was just like no money in banks, and banks were failing all over the place, all over the whole country, because people just thought that you could have a healthy bank. And that's like the scene from with George Bailey, where it was like, hey, like I want my money. He's like, well, I don't have your money. Like your money's out building, so-and-so's home, and your money's out there starting a new business, because they lend it out and then it comes back with interest. And that's how banks work. So if everybody rushes in to take all their money out at the same time, then the bank is considered insolvent and fails. So even if the banks were like operating properly and we're not like taking these crazy risks, fear basically puts banks out of business, because if they don't have any money to lend and they can't get any money back, there's no like exchange of money between the bank and the people in their community, then the bank folds up. And then all the people who had their bank in there, like on paper, even though it's not physically in there because it's been lent out, they get fucked. So then that's when they had this crisis that went throughout the whole country in 1907. And JP Morgan gets all the top bankers in the world, or in the country together, and brings them into his office. He has an office on Wall Street, and he's like, here's the deal. He like literally locks them in, okay? Every one of you is going to put up $25 million, and we're going to go around, and we're going to look at the banks in the different areas of the country. Everybody's going to be in charge of their own region. You're going to find the good banks and the healthy banks, and you're going to bail them out. So basically, we had an economic crisis similar to what we saw in 2008, where the federal government was like, every bank in this room is going to take money. Like you can't decline it, because if somebody declines it, then that means they're healthy, and someone who takes it is in bad shape. So then their stock just crashes even more. So instead of having the government do it 100 years ago, JP Morgan and these other bankers did it, and they basically kind of solidified their power, because they bought up or bailed out a lot of these smaller, like, regional community banks that were healthy but were insolvent because there was a run on them. So they were running properly, but they just were out of money. So everybody pooled together all this money, save all these banks, and that's kind of where the idea in America of this central banking system was born. So then they try to continually pass this law, but it's the same thing, like that idea, because like it goes back to the thing from Thomas Jefferson. We're like, we don't want to be beholden to some powerful central government and some central bank. So we're fuck it. So they're not going to do it. So they keep trying to write this law, and there's a senator from Rhode Island, Nelson Aldrich, who ends up being like married into the Rockefeller family, which at the time was the richest family in the world. So it's like weird, like all these different people kind of working together to figure something out. And they wanted to stop this cycle, supposedly, of these economic crashes, because there was one in 1819, 1837, 1893, 1896, 1906, 1907, solved in 1908, and they kept trying to put this legislation forward. They couldn't agree. And then they decide, hey, we got to get together. Every like powerful banking entity in the country, JP Morgan summons again for a secret meeting on a place called Jekyll Island in Georgia. And they write this bill. So the bank...
Jekyll Island in Georgia?
That's the name of it. Have you heard of it?
No. Does it still exist?
Oh, yeah. It's a real place. It sounds fake because it makes you think of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
But it's in Georgia, and it used to be like this very exclusive, like they said, like the top 100 wealthiest people in the country at the time had property there. And I don't know if it's quite that way now, but they all gathered and they wrote this bill. And so the bankers wrote this bill for the creation of the Federal Reserve, and they handed it over to Nelson Aldrich. And Nelson Aldrich then brings the finished bill, and they've like summoned support and to create the Federal Reserve, because the newspapers were kind of in on it. They had been paid off or purchased, talking about like why we need this, because we keep having these economic crises, whatever. And then they also said that there's a theory out there, a conspiracy theory, that one of the reasons why the 1907 collapse was so bad was because JP Morgan saw it and kind of instrumented it, so then they could get this passed. Mm-hmm. Okay. So then they get together and they write this law, the bankers do, and they bring it to their preferred candidate, which was Woodrow Wilson. It's like, you better get this thing fucking signed. We've been trying for years now. You're going to be the guy to sign it. He signs it, and then Woodrow Wilson has a quote on the Federal Reserve, because he's like, I don't even know what I fucking did. So after that, Woodrow Wilson says, and I think we might have talked about this on another podcast episode before too, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by a system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer government by conviction and by the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. He said that in 1919. So it's like, holy shit, like what actually happened here? So what happened was, and again, it is like very, very political. So they have these different banking centers all over the country. So there's 12 Federal Reserve banks, and there's one for New York, there's one for New England and Boston. There's one in Dallas, Texas. There's one in Chicago. And then there's the state of Missouri has two. There's one in St. Louis, and there's one in Kansas City, Missouri. Why do you think that is?
I don't know, but I'm interested to hear.
The deciding vote to pass this law on the Federal Reserve was cast by a pretty powerful senator from Missouri. So he wanted to ensure that his state had like a lot of his state and himself personally had some juice. And this is again, like this is way back early 1900s, where there's the population west of like the Appalachian Mountains is still very sparse compared to the East Coast. So you wanted to give Missouri and the Midwest a little bit more juice. So Kansas City was like the bank for like the Great Plains. So Nebraska, Kansas, all those places, their regional Federal Reserve Bank was in Kansas City. And then St. Louis had like their own like Tennessee, like kind of the Southeast Appalachian Mountains area too. So Missouri actually had both, which is like, and is all just based on politics. And then how it actually works is that it has a governing body and it's comprised of 7 people to run, kind of oversee these 12 banks. And the president, because they didn't want the president to have a ton of power over the banks. So they're like, the president will appoint the 7, like basically the board of governors for this thing. But the president can only make an appointment of a new governor every 2 years. And every once you're appointed, you have a 14-year term. So it's not like, hey, we got a new administration, they're going to change the way the fiscal policy of the country. Not really, because it's the same group of people for the most part all the time.
14-year term?
14-year term.
Wow, that's a big term.
Right. So then when you see people like Alan Greenspan, right? Like he was chairman of the Fed for a long time. He was there under Bush, he was there under Clinton, and he might have been there at the beginning of Obama, and he was there at the beginning of Obama too. So like those guys sit in those positions for a long, long time.
Hey, let's take a quick break here to talk about Dude Wipes, Dude Products. If you're using toilet paper anymore, that's disgusting.
Yeah,
I mean,
gross.
use it as like a base, but like if you're relying on it, you're crazy.
So I do it the other way as a base.
Oh, you go
I do first wipe, dude wipe, and then you clean up and dry up with the standard stuff.
I like that.
Yep.
I could see that being a good method.
It's my method.
That's good. So dudeproducts.com. Time to quit using that shitty scratching toilet paper and switch to Dude Wipes. Dude Wipes are extra large flushable wipes made with plant source fibers designed to give your butt a cleaner, more refreshing finish than TP after dropping a deuce. Be prepared for any situation on and off the course with Dude Wipes. They come in at home and on-the-go options. The on-the-go options are imperative if you're someone who's out and about going to festivals and, traveling and whatnot, because you never know when you're going to be in a pinch. And there's nothing worse going to a place that has the one ply that you just throw it off the roll and it just goes right through your fingers. So.
Brutal.
Yep. So go to dudeproducts.com, dudewipes.com, use code BC15. And you get 15% off your entire order. That's dudewipes.com. 15% off your entire order when you enter the code BC15. All right, let's hop back into the show.
And basically, each of these regional banks, so that the 12 regionals for all over the country, like I said, they're not federal institutions. They're set up as a private corporation. And they have stock like any other private organization. But you can't, like Eddie or me, go to the New York Stock Exchange and be like, hey, like I want to buy stock in the, Chicago branch of the Federal Reserve. That's not how it works. The way it works is that each and every like national chartered bank. So you have a bank, right? And they lend you money. Well, where do they get their money from? They get their money from the Chicago branch of the Federal Reserve. Those regional banks have to give 6% of their capital to the regional reserve. So if like some other banks come in, well, they get to pool from every other bank in the region, because if there's a bank in Springfield, Illinois or Milwaukee or wherever failing, then theoretically the Chicago branch, where they're like, hey, like we just had a big call on all these different investments that we made that we don't have the money in our reserves. So they call the regional bank and they give it out to them. And so they're not publicly traded companies, and the shares that these banks have, they get shares in return for giving up 6% of their capital to the regional bank or the regional reserve bank. And then they can't be sold or traded. It's just like, yeah, give us 6%. The price is fixed at $100. That's it. So it's not like it's a private corporation, but private citizens can't invest in it, and really nobody can. Okay, so then any money that is made from these corporations, again, so it's like, is it private? Is it public? It's kind of both, because if they have a profit, then they issue out a dividend, okay, which is like at the end of the year, you get like, we made money, but that dividend, that money goes directly to the United States federal government treasury. So like in 2017, for example, the Fed made a shit ton of money. It's usually a profitable thing. So it's like, how is our country always in debt? So they gave $80 billion to the treasury, and then 14 billion of the profits went back to these different regional private banks. And that's kind of how it works. So it's like, it's so like convoluted and confusing. Yeah. But and then who are these shareholders of these banks? So it ends up,
these banks can't fail then?
Too big to fail. And they're the Federal Reserve. So if you're looking at like, all right, well then they're not owned by the government and they're not owned by the banks. Who are they owned by? They're just owned by the biggest banks. Okay, so like, who has the shares? Well, it's like, who has the shares, that whoever was issued these shares that we talked about before? It's whoever has the most money in the banks. So it would be JP Morgan. It would be, Chase Manhattan. It was like all the biggest banks in the world. They're the ones who are really owning the Federal Reserve.
But what about the small, like, private banks that still exist? Like that, the smaller ones that are like that are somewhat mom and pop still. What I mean.
Yeah, there's not a ton of those left anymore. Yeah. Like the 2008 crisis killed a lot of those. But for the smaller banks, they still, if you're going to be a nationally chartered bank, the way that you get money to loan out is by dealing with your regional Federal Reserve Bank. So like, you have to be like, you can't, Eddie, just like get your buddies from the Northwest side, be like, hey guys, guess what? I'm starting a bank.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, you really can't do that. You have to go through a process and be nationally chartered. And then at the end of the year, you have to take whatever money you have, you have to take 6% of that and send it to the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank. So that's like, it's a wholly different system. And then they're the ones who are in charge, these banks, because they're in charge of the creation of the money. They're also in charge of like monetary policy, meaning what's the interest rate. And they create the money and then they lend it out to these banks, right? So when you go to an ATM or you go to take out money from a bank or take out a mortgage, they have like an interest rate attached. So like, it gets printed by the Federal Reserve. They lend it out at a certain percentage, and then your bank has it. And how does your bank make money? Well, they lend it back out to you at a higher percentage of whatever they got it from. So all of that money always gets, all those, if the interest rates go up or down, that's really because the Fed is making that happen. They're ones raising the interest rates. So I'm just making up numbers, but if it's at 2% and they lend it to your bank at 2%, then your bank will probably lend it to you at 3 or 4 or 5, depending on what the interest rate is. And that is also like, why are we getting in trouble with, like we talk about like inflation and things like that? Well, it's like, that's because money is really, really cheap. And it goes back to, because it's not really fixed or tied to anything, kind of back when we talked about the gold standard. So they can just lend out money forever because it doesn't really matter, because there's no fixed thing holding its value in place. It's just, just print more and keep the interest rates low. Because when the interest rates are low, people are more likely to invest and spend rather than save. That's kind of how the economy has always worked. That if interest rates are high, well, I'm not going to buy a house now. I'll just save, because I'll just put it in my bank and I'll get the interest on my savings. That'll accumulate, and then I'll save up and save up and save up and buy a house in a few years, because there's more value in it. But if interest rates are low, like they are now, I don't know if you've seen like these different ads, and we've talked about them in different places too, where like rates are at historically low rate. If you want to get a mortgage and it's at 2.35% right now, that's an incredible fucking deal that might not last forever. So then people are more likely to take out money. So it's all predicated on the Fed's policy. So what they're getting in trouble for today is that now they're getting, some of these different Federal Reserve Bank chairmen are getting in trouble for using their position of influence in just a blatant, gross way that there is a guy, his name is Robert Kaplan, and this came from the Wall Street Journal. Robert Kaplan was the Federal Reserve president of Dallas. He was making multi-million dollar stock trades, like a lot of them. And he's doing that in oil companies, Amazon, Apple, these different publicly traded companies, because he and his people are in direct contact and they have the ability to shape monetary policy, where it's like, I know I'm going to come out ahead on these, and I don't care what's necessarily good for the public and the country. It's good for me. So he was so like brazen about it that he like just put it in his like it's against the law. What he's doing is against the law, and he just put it in his like financial disclosure form. So like he has to do it legally, like he has to disclose his finances. Like, wait a second, you can't like make these huge multi-million dollar stock plays while sitting as president of the Fed. And this is a guy, he came from Goldman Sachs originally. So he's like a finance background guy, Wall Street guy. And his policy and the policy of the Fed directly influences the stock market and how some of these companies will do. So it's like, if you know what policies are coming, you can move, or you're shaping the policy, you can shape it to really benefit yourself.
Oh, yeah. And
so that's what he was doing. And the same thing with the president of the Boston Federal Reserve, which handles all of New England, got caught doing the same thing. And he's like, I'm just going to retire. I got health issues. So he just retired. But that's like, like these people are just like, they've always been like maybe doing it the whole time this way. And that goes back to like the JP Morgan, like, hey, like we can just control all the money for the country if we just set up this law. And that's kind of what they did. And that's what Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin were warning about. And then Woodrow Wilson, after the fact, being like, my bad, fucked up. We gave all the power to like 7 guys, and the chairman of the board of governors for the Federal Reserve. And now it's just like they can just do whatever they want. And they're so brazen about it that they're like, yeah, I made $10 million bet on Apple. And then I shaped the policy to make sure that bet won. So it's like actually fucking crazy corrupt. But I feel like there's just so much news with COVID and Biden and Afghanistan and the girl missing in the national parks. And like, it's just like this story just got like swept underneath the rug, that these people are just using their power grossly, brazenly to benefit themselves and nobody else, or maybe just them and their friends. Like, if you want to talk about like, hey, why are the mortgage rates and the interest rates so low for so long? Well, and then the housing market is hot right now, right? But why is it hot? Because BlackRock and these other giant companies are just buying everything up. Well, who's in charge of, maybe BlackRock, who is a big investment bank, is telling their people at the Federal Reserve, keep the rates low while we're buying everything up. And then when we want to offload this stuff, you can raise it. So everybody makes money, except for like the people, except for Eddie Ferrer.
That's your conspiracy theory?
I think that's a very good place to start looking. But nobody's going to look. No one's going to look. This was like a major investigation in Wall Street Journal. Did you heard of it?
No.
Yeah, no, because nobody, I hadn't heard of it until today. So that's what I mean. It's like no one, like these are major things where it's like we're distracted by a lot of other things going on. Meanwhile, like the real people in power, and these are the real people in power. Like these, you could talk about the Senate, the president, this and that. These people have way more power than even the president of the United States.
Oh, and I've become just so distracted too, where I think pretty much everybody's corrupt to an extent.
Yes.
And so I see something like this, it's like, oh, no surprise, keep scrolling.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard to be like, oh, corrupt. Well, it's like this word that's just out there. And it's like,
what's really corrupt and what's not.
Right.
There's so many.
And there's so many. Like I read a thing the other day where it was like, I think there was 138 cases where federal judges ruled on cases against ruled on cases involving companies that they were themselves invested in. So it's like, hey, like Comcast is being sued by somebody, and then the judge happens to be a major shareholder in Comcast. I wonder how that ruling is going to go. Like there was that was in the Wall Street Journal too, 138 cases like that, like recently. And this has been a problem going back, and they're saying like it goes all the way back to LBJ. So it's not like it's It's not a Republican Democrat thing. It's a corruption in the judicial system, in the Federal Reserve, you know, and all these different places that are supposed to be like above reproach. Like they set them up so like, hey, we don't want the Federal Reserve or the judiciary system being influenced by Washington. It has to be in a way like separate and above Washington, which on its surface seems like, yeah, like we don't want some politician dickhead coming in here being short-sighted and fucking everything up. So let's keep it separate. But then it's like, it's not really separate. So the judge is just like, yeah, fuck that. And like, so it's Lyndon Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Clinton, Obama, like all these different judges appointed by both sides of the political aisle are engaging in this type of behavior. And like the citizens are just getting fucked. You and me and Lance and Harry. Everybody in this room just gets fucked.
Fucked up, man.
It's super fucked up. And it's like, you know, and it's like that the guy who's the president of the Boston Fed, like I was referencing before, he was heavily invested in these different real estate trusts. So it's like, yeah, let's keep the rates low while his fund and his trust is buying up all these different real estate assets, and then I'll retire, take my money, and just be gone with you people.
It's crazy, man.
It's crazy.
Like
if
you're going to offer
that?
these long terms, and like you're basically giving these people, you know, these jobs for life.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be able to do much anything else, right? I don't know. Like, I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know what the answer is either, but it's like maybe Bitcoin's the answer.
You think so?
I think it could be. The more I read about it, the more it makes sense, because it's like everything's protected. There's a limited supply. I don't know what you do if like the internet crashes. Then what's money? Who fucking knows? But because that's like someone blogged this on Barstool like maybe last week. It was like a very chief blog that I didn't get to, but there's like solar waves coming supposedly that'll knock out the internet for like 80 days, something like that.
Whoa,
that's like a theory, right?
Whoa.
That could happen, and that's like a very real threat. Like there's
crazy.
Yeah, so like the sun ejects like these. You know, they have these bursts of like energy and heat that come out of the sun. It happens all the time. And that's like something people point to as like a blanking on the name of what they're actually called, but like the anti-global warming people will say, well, there's been like way more, I think they're called coronal mass ejections or something like that, which is like a burst of energy coming from the sun, where it's basically like the sun burps, basically. It just goes, burps out at us. And like those things, these solar flares have enough like power in them to like knock out all of our satellites and our power grid. And then we would all just be like in the dark, fucked. Okay. So like if the internet's out for 80 days and like, I think Nicaragua or Guatemala, one of those Central American countries has just a couple weeks ago enacted a policy to make Bitcoin their Federal Reserve currency. So like you do, like, remember we've talked about before, like, hey, like I want to buy a Starbucks with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Well, you can actually do that in one of those Central American countries now.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, it's not inconceivable that it could be everywhere, but then it's like, well, if there really is a doomsday scenario, what is money? It's crazy. I don't know.
Dude, I couldn't imagine. What would happen? Like, I mean, Portland would have to fire up the fucking printing press again. We'd be back to newspapers.
Barstool safe mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, could you imagine?
I mean, I don't want to.
What the fuck would we do?
Dude, like the whole world is shut down.
I know.
Because it's like everything is linked to that now.
Yeah.
And like if you want to like how do you even buy gas for your car? Like Britain's going through that shortage. I don't know if you saw that, but like Cristiano Ronaldo was in line with his Lamborghini to get gas for 7 hours last week. Just nobody can get gas because they're going through a shortage. Can you imagine if like every logistics thing, like we took a tour of Supreme Lobster. We walk into this control room, all GPS, where all their trucks are, all their shipments, and they're just moving seafood. Imagine that for every single product in the world, whoosh, shut down all at once. Like people, we're talking like, I don't know.
We wouldn't know how to function. We need the old timers to come back and be like, hey, like here's how you got to do it.
It would turn into, what's that Denzel movie where they're just like post-apocalyptic, like they're trading like, you know, gold and like rocks and seashells and shit for like valued goods, because like we wouldn't be able to get food. We'd probably have like, I'm not joking, like hundreds of millions of people worldwide starve to death in 80 days. because there's just no way, like, who knows how to get anything. So if you like live in the West and you know how to hunt elk, like, we better be like, let's make real good friends with Sydney, you know, because she would be our key to survival here. Craziness.
That would be absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Wow. And then is that just a headline that we're going to run out of money, or is that due to the contract budget thing?
Yeah, that's one of those things I'm not like, we could probably do we definitely could do like a month-long series on that if we wanted to, but that, to me, it seems like that's an issue that pops up every so often, every few years, and it's like political jockeying and like this party is the worst, no, the other party is the worst, and then they always get a deal done. But yeah, like on paper, we wouldn't have any money because we haven't raised the debt ceiling, and we have to go in debt to pay for all of our shit, and that's the other thing. So you, like this, with the way this Federal Reserve System works, you can never pay it back because you have to, like, they're lending, every time they print a dollar, it's with interest. So you're paying them back with something that's not worth as much as it was when you got it. You know, so it's like you're just constantly trying to chip away at something you just can't, you can never get out from underneath the debt. It's like, by definition, that is like a form of slavery. Like that, like that's a monetary slavery. But it is a headline. So we'll see.
See what happens.
See what happens.
All right. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Chief. We'll see you all tomorrow.